Chapter 5. The Dialectical Conception of Development. The idea of evolution. We have seen that the corrections of the mechanistic standpoint made by dialectical materialism are fully justified by and have a basis in the advance of science. Indeed, the advance of science itself has shattered the whole conception of the universe held by the older mechanistic materialists. According to that conception, the universe always remained much the same. It was a huge machine which always did the same things, kept grinding out the same products, went on and on in a perpetual cycle of the same processes. Thus, it used to be thought that the stars and the solar system always remained the same, and that the earth, with its continents and oceans, and the plants and animals inhabiting them, likewise always remained the same. But this conception has given way to the conception of evolution, which has invaded all spheres of investigation without exception. Science, however, does not advance in isolation from society as a whole, and the widespread application of the idea of evolution was due not simply to its verification in scientific theory, but also to its popularity with the new rising forces of industrial capitalism, themselves the patrons of science. Quote, "The bourgeoisie cannot exist without constantly revolutionizing the instruments of production, and thereby the relations of production, and with them the whole relations of society. Conservation of the old modes of production in unaltered form was, on the contrary, the first condition of existence of all earlier industrial classes. Constant revolutionizing of production, uninterrupted disturbance of all social conditions, everlasting uncertainty and agitation distinguish the bourgeois epoch from all earlier ones." End quote from Marx and Engels, Manifesto of the Communist Party. The industrial capitalists saw themselves as the bearers of progress, and as they thought progress was the law of capitalism, so they saw it as the law of the whole universe. So there was made possible a great advance in the scientific picture of the universe. We find developing a picture of the universe not as static, as always the same, but as in continual progressive development. The stars did not always exist. They were formed out of masses of dispersed gas. Once formed, the whole stellar system, with all the stars in it, goes through an evolutionary process, stage by stage. Some stars, like our sun, acquire planets, a solar system. Thus the Earth was born. As its surface cooled, so chemical compounds were formed, impossible in the high temperatures of the stars. Thus matter began to manifest new properties, non-existent before, the properties of chemical combination. Then organic compounds were formed out of the complex linking of carbon atoms. And from organic matter, the first bodies arose which began to manifest the properties of life, of living matter. Still new properties of matter emerged, the properties of living matter. Living organisms went through a long evolution, leading eventually to man. With man, human society was born, and still new processes, with new laws, arose. The laws of society, and the laws of thought. What comes next? Capitalist science can go no further. Here it ends, since capitalist science cannot contemplate the ending of capitalism. But socialist science shows that man himself is about to embark on a new phase of evolution, communist society, in which the whole social process will be brought under his own conscious, planned direction. All this is the evolutionary history of the material universe. Apart from the last point, it may be said this is all common knowledge. Bourgeois thinkers know this as well as Marxists, though they often forget it. But Marxism does not only stress the fact that everything in the world goes through a process of development. What Marxism found out was how to understand and explain this development in a materialist way. Marx's scientific discoveries about the laws of development of society were made by applying the conceptions of materialist dialectics. That is why Marxism alone is able to give a fully scientific account of development and to point out the future path. Marx demonstrated how to understand all change and development in nature and in society in a materialist way, and therefore how to become masters of the future. Idealist conceptions of change and development. How did bourgeois thinkers try to account for the universal change and development which they discovered? Let us consider what some of them have had to say over a period of more than a century. Hegel said that the whole process of development taking place in history was due to the absolute idea realizing itself in history. Herbert Spencer said that all development was a process of increasing quote-unquote integration of matter, and he put this down to what he called an quote-unquote incomprehensible and omnipresent power. Henri Bergson said that everything was in process of evolution due to the activity of the life force. Fairly recently, a school of British philosophers has coined the phrase emergent evolution. They pointed out that in the course of development, new qualities of matter are continually emerging, one after the other. But as to why this should happen, one of the leaders of this school, Professor Samuel Alexander, said that it was inexplicable and must be accepted, quote-unquote, with natural piety. While another of its leaders, Professor C. Lloyd Morgan, said that it must be due to some immanent force at work in the world, which he identified with God. Thus, in every case, some fantasy, something inexplicable and unpredictable, was conjured up to explain development. And so, when they thought about the future, all these bourgeois philosophers of evolution either thought, like Hegel, that development had now finished. Hegel taught that the absolute idea was fully realized in the Prussian state, of which he was a distinguished employee, or else regarded the future as unfathomable. Nowadays, they begin to give up hope altogether and regard everything, past, present, and future, as incomprehensible, the result of forces no one can ever understand or control. A second defect in the evolutionary ideas of most bourgeois thinkers is that they regard the process of evolution as a smooth, continuous, and unbroken process. They see the process of transition from one evolutionary stage to another as taking place through a series of gradations without conflict and without any break in continuity. But continuity is not the law of development. On the contrary, periods of smooth, continuous evolutionary development are interrupted by sudden and abrupt changes. The emergence of the new stage in development takes place when the conditions for it have matured, by a break in continuity, by the leap from one state to another. Hegel was the first to point this out. With every period of transition, he observed, quote, it is as in the case of the birth of a child. After a long period of nutrition in silence, the continuity of the gradual growth in size of quantitative change is suddenly cut short by the first breath drawn. There is a break in the process, a qualitative change, and the child is born. End quote from Phenomenology of Mind. But Marx alone followed up this profound observation of Hegel. As for the ensuing bourgeois thinkers, although the investigations of science and common experience itself clearly demonstrate that development cannot take place without discontinuity, without abrupt transitions and the leap from one state to another, they have nevertheless, in their general theories, tried to make unbroken continuity the law of evolution. This prejudice in favor of a smooth line of evolution has gone hand in hand with the liberal belief that capitalist society will evolve smoothly through orderly bourgeois progress, broadening down from precedent to precedent, as Tennyson once expressed it. To have thought differently about evolution in general would have implied that we would have to think differently about social evolution in particular. The dialectical materialist conception of development. The problem of understanding and explaining development in a materialist way that is in harmony with the facts conceived in their own and not in a fantastic connection is answered by dialectical materialism. Dialectical materialism considers the universe not as static, not as unchanging, but as in continual process of development. It considers this development not as a smooth, continuous, and unbroken process, but as a process in which phases of gradual evolutionary change are interrupted by breaks in continuity, by the sudden leap from one state to another. And it seeks for the explanation, the driving force of this universal movement, not in inventions of idealist fantasy, but within material processes themselves, in the inner contradictions, the opposite conflicting tendencies, which are in operation in every process of nature and society. The main ideas of materialist dialectics, which are applied in dealing with the laws of development of the real material world, including society, will be the subject of the following chapters. But this is how Lenin summed them up in his philosophical notebooks. The essential idea of materialist dialectics is, quote, the recognition of the contradictory, mutually exclusive, opposite tendencies in all phenomena and processes of nature. This alone furnishes the key to the self-movement of everything in existence. It alone furnishes the key to the leaps, to the break in continuity, to the transformation into the opposite, to the destruction of the old and emergence of the new. In its proper meaning, dialectics is the study of the contradiction within the very essence of things. Development is the struggle of opposites. End quote. Where contradiction is at work, there is the force of development. This materialist understanding of dialectics is the key to understanding the forces of development within the material world itself, without recourse to outside causes. This discovery arises from the whole advance of science and philosophy. But above all, it arises from the investigation of the laws of society, an investigation made imperative thanks to the very development of society, from the discovery of the contradictions of capitalism, explaining the forces of social development, and thereby showing the way forward from capitalism to socialism. That is why bourgeois thinkers could not answer the problem of explaining the real material forces of development in nature and society. To answer this problem was to condemn the capitalist system, and here they had a blind spot. Only the revolutionary philosophy of the vanguard of the revolutionary class, the working class, could do it. Marx's discovery of the laws of materialist dialectics showed us how to understand the dialectical development of nature, but above all, it showed us how to understand social change and how to wage the working class struggle for socialism. This discovery revolutionized philosophy. It signalized the triumph of materialism over idealism by doing away with the limitations of the merely mechanistic materialism of the past. It likewise spelled the end of all systems of philosophy. It made philosophy into a revolutionary weapon of the working people, an instrument, a method for understanding the world so as to change it.